Hi, this is John who made the Cantonese font. Originally, this is a talk given at the Workshop of Innovations in Cantonese Linguistics held in Provo, Utah in mid-2025. Inside the Cantonese font, there are certain mechanisms that are built so that making Jyutping-annotated multimedia become less time-consuming, more accessible to everyone. And this is a description of what that looks like. Where is the problem, and how do we solve it? One of the basic issue about Sinitic languages, and particularly Cantonese, is that we represent it with ideographs, honji, kanji, but it incompletely do so. For example, if we were to talk about these two characters, well, these three characters, you may say they are the same character, but they could mean three completely different things. 有溫書喎 means I'm surprised in a positive way that you did study for something. 有溫書喎 is a bit more skeptical, and 有溫書喎 is you say you have studied, but I do not believe you. They're represented with the same character, and depending on the reading, in this case, depending on the intonation, it means something completely different. Beyond the character level, we see the same thing happening on words. For example, if we have these two identically written things, on the top one, we read it as 區議員, it means a district councillor. If we say 歐議員, same glyph, same drawing, it would mean a councillor with the last name 歐. Sometimes it happens on a sentence level. So for example, when we say 畫畫好啦, and 畫畫好啦, these two versions are written exactly the same way, but when you say 畫, it means a verb. If you say 畫, that is a noun. So the two actually would mean draw and do nothing else on the top. 畫畫好啦, 做第二啲嘢就要罰抄啦. And the middle one would mean 畫畫好啦, the drawing is finished. And there's one more level where the Hanzi, the Chinese character, is not sufficient to designate the meaning. For example, when you read this, it's in a bakery next door to me. Most people would parse these five characters as 牛油皮蛋撻, which means butter, pastry, egg tart. There's a different way, a bit more unusual way of parsing this, which is to take the first two characters as a group. 牛油, butter, 皮蛋, preserved egg tart, fermented egg tart, blended together, a bit strange. In all these cases, what we're talking about is that it is not the character that gives the meaning, but a combination of character together with the reading that gives it the meaning. And it affects the grouping, it affects the meaning of the single character, the word, or the overall sentence. Very often this stacks. For example, here is a 5-character sentence, and it could mean 成分錯晒喎, the ingredients are all wrong. 成分錯晒喎, the ingredients are all wrong, and I'm surprised in a negative way. 成分錯晒喎. I did not believe that the ingredients are all wrong. 成分 could be 成分, same character. Now it means the whole thing. And again, we have 3 combinations, so 5 characters could have 6 semantic senses. This is a problem because if we just give these 5 characters to a text-to-speech engine, it's going to read you one of the 6 and you have no control over it. It's a problem to instruct text-to-speech engine, and it is also a problem for instructing real humans. So usually at this point, people go, what we do is we annotate everything with a Jyutping so the sense is clear. And from my experience, I can tell you that full Jyutping annotations are really, really painful. Let me show you an example of something I've done in 2022 before the Cantonese font was available. This is a parallel by first Chinese-English parallel typesetting of the Gospel of Matthew. And let's zoom into just first 7 and 8. What we have to do here, this is very information dense. We're looking at having each Chinese character accompanied by a Jyutping, because that's what we say. We need to put down the Jyutping for dong or dong, ha or ha in order to differentiate it. We need to talk about where is the segmentation so that we don't cut up Heron or Bethlehem across two lines. The markup that you need to generate something like this looks like that. This is just verse 7 and 8. And without the English parallel part, it's really, really difficult to read. 43,000 characters of this have me tear my hair out. Just Bethlehem, because we want to show that this is a proper noun, and geographic names, people names, all have to be underlined. So this block corresponds to that markup. How do we do things such as a narrated 他們唱了詩就出來往橄欖山去? How do we synchronize audio? And if we prepared the markup for one version, how do we prepare the markup for the other versions? For example, if we have access to color, maybe we will want to do the version on the lower left where we use red to do the emphasis. Maybe we have a version where we underline proper name and we use the double angle arrow to show a book name. Maybe we want to lay out vertically and we use dots to do the emphasis and wavy line classically to designate book names. If we were to do what I just showed you, typing all the markup in explicitly, we would have been locked in. The problem that we have at this point is that either we go just with Hanzi and it represents Cantonese incompletely, or we go full notation where it's super painful to type. It's unreadable, it's locked in. We may want to prepare multimedia for documentation, presentation, images. We want to use them in Pages, in Word, in Keynote, in Photoshop, in Illustrator. Maybe we want to do print typesetting with a markup language like LaTeX or Type. Maybe we want to use the Jyutping on web, HTML, Common Markdown, wiki format. We want to use them in subtitle formats. We want to use them in ebooks. We want to use them in mixed media, maybe with a physical embedded device. Maybe we just want to have all of that in a data exchange format like XML or JSON. Maybe we want to use that as some kind of a prompt and a prompt input to TTS so that we get audio. How do we do that? We don't want to repeat the same annotation process for every single one of these 10, 15 formats that I've shown here. We could be writing an interchange converter from XML to JSON, from JSON to VTT, but that means writing 15 times 15 pairs of conversions. My proposal and what we're going to talk about in this talk is the Cantonese markup. It is three things at once. It is a format, it is what you type, Second, it is an editor. There's a way that makes entering Cantonese markup easy. And there's additionally an interpreter. So this markup can be done something downstream. We'll do one thing at a time. The Cantonese markup have two components. The first component is that the general format. Here, we really only have three rules. The first is that whenever we use a vertical bar, it delimits word boundaries. Often, in the case of the butter pastry or fermented egg pastry, we want to break up a sentence. So we introduce a vertical bar to delimit it. As a second example, we have 7 glyphs here. If we do the bar in between 3 and 4, that would mean city of Nanjing, Namgingsi, the great Yangtze River Bridge, Chenggang Daiqiu. If we cut it between 2 and 3, between 4 and 5, now it is Namging, Xizheng, Gang Daiqiu. That would be Nanjing city mayor, whose name is Gang Daiqiu. By putting a bar, we tell everyone, people or computer, where it segments. The second rule is whenever we use a period, it pins down a variation. So for example, the character for car, 车, could have been read in two ways. What we do is we add the dot and then we write down which variation we want. So in one case, we have 车.ce1. That means we want this 车 pronunciation of this character, whereas if we have dot goi1, we pin down the variation to be the goi variation in order to do the reading. The third overall general concept is that whenever we have functions, we use braces, we will use mustache curly braces to annotate it. For example, I gave this talk in Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City is a proper noun, is a geographical name, and conventionally we need to treat it differently. How it's being treated differently depends on your media. We want to defer that decision of how we treat it with the exporter function. So what we do is we put a brace and then we say name, Yin Wu Seng, and then we close the brace. If you have used any kind of markup language before, if you write svelte, for example, on the front end, you're going to find this really, really familiar. What this means is that a sentence like 我在鹽湖城, I am in Salt Lake City, would have been in full look something like this. 我 might have multiple readings, so we go 我.ngo5 to pin down the reading. 在, we pin down the reading. 鹽湖城, each time we pin down the reading. I, physically located, Salt Lake City, and we use the word boundary bar to cut it open. Then we have a specific implementation of this general rule. It is exactly the same rule, but if we provide some defaults, we could trim down this very long bunch of glyphs that confuses our eyes. How often do you read 我, the character meaning I, in some other pronunciation? Very, very infrequently. The same is true for 在, 鹽, 湖, 城. So we can, if we accept some kind of a default reading, what we can do is we can compress that down and say 我在鹽湖城. This is a short form. Now it becomes very readable, and all it needs is for our grapheme to phoneme engine to provide a default. Specific to the Cantonese font, there is some extra variation sets, some extra function sets. So we are going to take a look at this, and we are going to jump out from the presentation to do a demonstration. In the grapheme to phoneme engine of the Cantonese font, we designate the war character with a default reading of war because that is most common. 區議員, the definition, the default reading is 區議員, and this is default, even though it is the same glyph. When it is preceding Thai as an ideograph, that usually mean a last name because this mean together Mrs. Au. If we want something different, so for example, if we want war to be the war reading, a different tone, what we do is we pin down .wo5. If I were to take this character and I'm going to switch the font back to a normal font, that's what you see. In the Cantonese font, as part of the function of it acting as an editor, it's showing War 5 for something that looks like this. And the same happened by 區議員, where by appending .au1, what we get is a visual of it looking like 歐議員, whereas underlying plain text looks like that. We can have other specific variation sets. So for example, in the Cantonese font, this is a plain long dragon in a Japanese glyph. And if we take this Japanese glyph and we come over here and we append .cn, then it is going to give you the localized variation of the Japanese dragon, which is the simplified form of the Chinese character. And we can do the same thing for the Hong Kong variation or the Taiwan localized glyph, which happen to be the same. The Hong Kong localized glyph is not always the same as the Taiwanese one. For example, in Hong Kong, we prefer Quan, that is the gentleman over the sheep, whereas in Taiwan, they prefer that variation. And we can start with the same glyph and change it to the localized glyph. So, and these two features, the one where you choose a localized glyph and the reading of the Jyutping can stack. So something like this looks like that in the editor, in the font, which is the editor. Let's continue with some feature that maybe you have thought about the moment you see the bar, which may be surprising to you. Because we are only introducing as plain text this vertical bar, we could manually type it, but we could also use a secondary tool. And we can, so what that means is you can use something like Kitba, Jiaba to do the segmentation using a Cantonese lexicon. And if you need to override it, then you come back and override it. So that you get a semi-automated segmentation, which provide you with some additional semantics. Some other specific implementation are the function sets that are provided by the interpreter. So in the font, when you have this braces name, you get an indication of a name. And what this looks like in the Cantonese font is, let me introduce a new text box here. When I type NAME and I close the brace, it automatically turns into this notation. So we can go, there's Paul, and we close the name. And the plain text markup, which is this thing, is going to be readable by the parser and do something with it when we need to export it to XML, export it to HTML, export it to subtitle, and so on. The variety of text is quite long. The ones that are of interest to us might be name, which is indicating a name, a book, and maybe we don't need this glyph, so we can go strike, and we remove that or we can emphasize it is allegedly the author. We can have additionally Jyutping, no Jyutping for the cases where we want to annotate. We generally don't want those Jyutping, but we really need these two, perhaps to show that the first whole and the second whole is read a little differently. And so there is an additional function tag. Often we want to talk about not only typographic elements that are standalone, but want to indicate a particular scope. So in the Cantonese font, in the Cantonese font markup, there is a semantic scope. When you go mustache bracket, section, paragraph, sentence, clause, word, it indicates all of these scope, of which you can then add on other notation, such as the timing. If you go word.time, it gives you this little clock icon to show you that this is the timing belonging to the word. Perhaps we are doing a TTS thing, text-to-speech thing, and we want to show there is particular emotion coming along for this sentence. Then what we can do is we go sentence, and that's the emotions. We close it, and now we have a tag indicating that. Perhaps that is happy, or sad, or angry. When we are done, then we close the sentence emotion tag, and we know that scope belongs to the sentence and not some other thing. Visually, the sentence line up, and if we change it to a paragraph, then it slides a little different place. We can talk about scoped attributes, and we also have special scopes that are for the that doesn't associate with a paragraph unit. For example, we just want to talk about this character, then we can do a numbering system like this. I will remove the space now, and now we get a number notation. So maybe we want to talk about Yao Ge as some kind of a unit. The list of things that are possible include annotating. We want to provide an annotation. For example, maybe we want to do interlinear text. So then 12 might have been and then we go, the annotation of this thing is a bus. We have some kind of a bus.mp3 that we can play depending on where we pull it from, or it's probably going to be basi. We have, yes, the Cantonese font automatically do the Jyutping tone mark changing. Maybe we want to provide a reference to Wikipedia. If we're speaking it from a transcript, maybe we want some kind of a timing. So all of these could be enclosed inside a particular pair. And it's reasonably readable, especially when it's all clearly marked out like that. And this is what we can do instead of going full XML, marking up everything and having so much visual noise that it is unworkable. Once you have made your annotations, the next thing that can happen is this is the complete PEG grammar, parser, expression grammar for the markup. And what that does is it allows you to start with something like this and get to something like that. What is something like that? It is a audio synchronized radio drama line where we can play. What we're looking at here is some way of marking up a piece of text such that it's synchronized with the audio. It synchronizes with a sentence level translation. It synchronizes with a part of speech, which is where the color is, and implicitly a segmentation, what constitute a word and what don't constitute a word. And we have the Jyutping on top. And all of this really just come from a markup like that. We can secondarily look up a database for 膝頭哥 is a knee. So this is the small piece of work that we need to do manually in order to get something that is pretty sophisticated. That was the demonstration. At the end of the day, ultimately, the Cantonese markup is a way to generate practically generate Jyutping-annotated multimedia. It's a format that we have a peg grammar for. It's clear and ambiguous. It is the font act as a editor and is universal in the sense that I'm showing you in Keynote. You could use it in Word. I'm showing you on Mac. You could use it on Windows. No, pretty much anything that you choose to use, you can edit it on your iPhone. And we have an interpreter that currently exports to HTML. It exports to types. It could export to XML and JSON. There's a variety of things we can do downstream. If you have questions, you can find me here. And the project is located at canto.hk.